In the past few years, Europe has quietly been making steady progress towards decarbonisation and renewables. In December, the European Commission presented its new European Grids package, a set of proposals to improve cross-border energy infrastructure in the EU, including plans to streamline processes for grids, renewables and storage, boost grid connectivity and upgrade existing infrastructure, and prioritise funding for 8 selected energy highways in different locations across the EU. So in this video, we'll explain the problems with the EU's existing energy infrastructure and how the EU's new energy grids package aims to fix it. We've heard a lot of talk about Europe de-risking or decoupling from the US recently. So in the latest issue of our magazine, we thought we'd discuss whether it's actually feasible and why Europe could still struggle without US backing. That's just one of the 72 pages in the magazine, because as always, there's more to too long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. First, let's explain Europe's existing energy grid and the problems with it. Back in November 2023, the EU adopted its Action Plan for Grids, a €584 billion initiative to future-proof the EU's energy network. In other words, to ensure access to stable, affordable, clean and secure energy across the bloc. This both complemented the European Green Deal and also underpinned the EU's efforts to reduce its dependence on Russian oil and gas. After all, the best way for the EU to reduce its dependence on Russian oil and gas, and avoid becoming dependent on some other oil exporter, like America, is to decarbonise more generally. In practice, this means replacing hydrocarbons with electricity, but Europe's current electricity grid just isn't prepared for this shift. For context, nearly 40% of Europe's distribution grids are over 40 years old and in urgent need of upgrades. But a shortage of skilled labour and operators being inundated with thousands of new grid connection requests made every month has choked the system and slowed efforts to modernise the grid. Moreover, some EU countries, like Portugal and Spain, have limited interconnection with the rest of the continent, which worsened the impact of mass blackouts in both countries in April last year. Arguably, the main problem, though, is delays. The delivery of new energy infrastructure across Europe has been held back by the slow planning and permissions process, which is especially burdensome for wind and solar projects, with the European Commission noting that electricity transmission grids take around 10 years to complete, with more than half of that time taken up by permissions. In fact, in some member states, permissions can take up to 9 years. This has created significant bottlenecks in grid expansion, with cases of wind farms being built and ready to produce energy, and yet unable to connect to the grid because of permissions delays. This has undermined investment in Europe's energy infrastructure and pushed back decarbonisation targets, with the gap between renewables capacity, which is rapidly increasing, and grid connection, which is sluggish, also contributing to higher congestion costs for consumers, which occur when the grid lacks sufficient capacity to deliver electricity from where it's generated to high-demand areas. As such, the new grids package basically aims to reduce these bottlenecks through 3 main pillars. 1. Improving cross-border infrastructure planning. 2. Reducing permissions delays to accelerate infrastructure development. And 3. Fast-tracking 8 selected energy highways to improve interconnectivity. So let's take a look at each of these in turn. The first is improving cross-border infrastructure planning. To this end, the Commission proposes an amendment to the EU's 10E regulation, first introduced in 2013 and revised in 2022, to address the shortcomings in the previous planning system. The Commission identifies 3 main problems. There's a substantial gap between Europe's cross-border energy infrastructure needs and the speed of infrastructure development. The implementation of cross-border infrastructure projects is too slow, increasing overall project costs and impeding network development. And recent physical and cybersecurity incidents have highlighted the risk of hostile actors targeting the EU's energy infrastructure, with consequences for both cost and energy stability. To solve this, the EU wants to establish a central energy infrastructure planning network within 2 years, which will be responsible for tracking grid-related manufacturing needs. It will also look into non-wire solutions, cost-effective, non-traditional ways of managing grid capacity, such as energy storage systems to improve power flow efficiency, or digital technologies to help match supply and demand, and identify and fill gaps in grid capacity. The EU will also, quote, facilitate the use of cost-sharing tools, i.e. mechanisms that allow the costs of building or upgrading cross-border energy infrastructure to be shared more fairly between member states, meaning that countries that host major interconnectors won't bear a disproportionate share of the cost. Finally, the EU wants to protect cross-border energy infrastructure from sabotage and cyber attacks by increasing installations of protection and resilience equipment on critical parts of the network. The package's second aim is reducing bottlenecks in the permission system. As we mentioned earlier, current permitting processes can take up to 9 years in some EU countries. So to reduce this, the Commission has issued new, long-awaited requirements on electricity transmission and distribution infrastructure, with the aim of limiting permitting processes to 2 years, and no more than 3 years for the most complex projects. One proposal is that all electricity projects of common interest benefit from, quote, an automatic presumption of overriding public interest, meaning that they're considered essential for society and therefore qualify for priority treatment. Another proposal is introducing targeted measures to ease certain environmental obligations, given that environmental assessments have been repeatedly identified as the step most prone to delays. In fact, the average duration of an environmental impact assessment in the EU for general infrastructure projects is estimated to be around 20.6 months, so reducing this should allow energy projects to move more quickly from planning to construction, in turn helping to alleviate grid bottlenecks. The third and most eye-catching part of the package is the EU's 8 so-called energy highways. Shown on screen now, these include 5 electricity infrastructure developments, 2 hydrogen pipelines, and 1 gas project, identified as potential keys to unlocking lower power prices in Europe. These selected projects will essentially be prioritised at both the EU and respective national levels, with targeted financial support and accelerated permit granting processes. They've each been chosen because of their role in interconnectivity. The Iberian Peninsula crossing, for instance, was chosen as France has long resisted cross-border electricity cables across the Pyrenees. But the EU is pushing for at least one of the 2 cables that will integrate Spain and Portugal's solar and wind capacities into the EU's energy grid to be launched this quarter. Similarly, the Danish Baltic Sea island of Bornholm is set to become an offshore energy hub, connecting wind farms to Germany, Denmark, and possibly Poland, with Denmark and Germany reaching an agreement last month. Finally, this new energy grids package doesn't actually require any additional spending from the EU budget, as it's just amending regulations and prioritising certain projects to increase efficiency. While it might encounter some pushback from environmental NGOs or European Greens over the changes to environmental assessments, as well as from far-right parties skeptical of the green transition, the measures are designed to be narrowly targeted and procedural, and most policymakers tend to agree that reducing bureaucracy and delays in infrastructure is a necessary move. As we mentioned earlier, the latest issue of our magazine, Too Long, is out very soon. And if you subscribe using code SPRING26, then you can get your first copy for as little as $4.99, as well as 20% off every future copy, as long as you stay subscribed. This latest issue features our ranking of the world's 25 most influential people, using ratings from you, our audience, as well as our journalists. Inside, we reveal not only the full ranking, but also the stories of a number of people who made the list, from the return of Donald Trump and the calculated moves of Xi Jinping, to the AI frontiers of Sam Altman. We also look at the new entries: New York's first Muslim Mayor Zohran Mamdani, the radical shift of Pope Leo XIV, and bastion of technocracy Mark Carney, as well as the shadows that still linger, like Jeffrey Epstein. Across 72 pages, this issue of Too Long features a whole lot more than just that though. We also have our whole cover story dedicated to how the UK became more divided than ever, and how a broken country can rebuild, as well as the fragmentation that's emerged within the EU, and how religion is being hijacked by politicians. Pre-order your copy at toolong.news, and remember to use code SPRING26 for our best ever price.